You are listening to the latest message from Bar None Cowboy Ministries, where we don't care about your past, but care about your future. We hope you are encouraged by today's message.
All right. Starting Revelation. And let me tell you, it is revelation, not revelations, like a lot of people think, because it is a revelation to one person, not revelations to many people. It is revelation. Not shun, revelation. Revelation, yeah. A lot of people, myself included, usually steer clear from this book, at least by trying to explain it or teach it. And so I'm going about it a different way, a way that is not kind of looking towards the future, that is trying to coincide things together. Like, say we see something that's out there and say, oh, that could match up. I'm going to go about it in a way that was meant for the churches at the time. And you'll hear about, there's 4 different views of this book, and you'll hear about that tonight. So I'm going to go about it in a way of a futuristic book, but not looking back through, hey, this happened in this date, this happened with this date, line it up. Why? Because we have no idea if that's exactly what John was talking about. So you'll see that in a minute. Tonight, though, we are focusing mainly on just the introduction. The introduction of the book, the writer, the date, the context. And we're going to look at these 7 churches as well just a little bit. So, who is the writer of the book? John. And there's no dispute that the writer of the book is John, because it clearly states it in the first couple of verses in the book, John. However, there are some out there that think this was not the John that wrote the book of John, or 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, not John the Apostle. Some people think that this is called John the Elder, who is a different one, who was one of the main guys, pastors in the Asia Minor area. But I'm going to argue that this is the exact same John that was the apostle. Okay? And there's evidences for this to be that way. First of all, the writer refers to himself as John. Well, we know that. Second of all, he had personal relationships with the 7 churches in Asia Minor. Okay? And we know this because he's writing letters to these churches. Third, we can look at his circumstances at the time of the writing. Where was John? He was exiled on an island called Patmos. And then, it matched those of John the Apostle. John the Apostle was exiled at that time as well, from about 70 AD to 100 AD. And we know that is a reliable historical fact because of sources that even claim that in the 2nd century AD, that John the Apostle was the one that did this. Revelation has many themes and theological ideas that are common to John's gospel and his letters. For example, only the Gospel of John and the book of Revelation are the only ones to refer to Jesus as the Word. That right there can show that most likely John the Apostle was the one that wrote this book. Another one is Jesus as the Lamb. Only John the Gospel did that and Revelation. And then also the theme of witnesses. Remember in John, he always said that he was a witness to these accounts. In Revelation, he's saying that he's a witness to these accounts. However, arguments for the elder John are that these are different wordings, the different thematic style of the book. They don't line up together in the same style that John writes through his letters. We can negate that fact. We can come against that to the point of saying, well, this book is not like just a letter that he had wrote to the churches, because it is a prophetic book. So yes, there are going to be different words. There's going to be different phrases and how it is set out. Another thing that gives evidence to John the Apostle is the early church unanimously says that John the Apostle was the one that wrote the book of Revelation. So Revelation begins with John. He was the last surviving apostle at the time. All the other disciples were martyred and killed. John was the only one who died of old age. Every single one of them, apart from John, were killed in some sort of way. He was placed into exile to an island called Patmos. It was located in the Aegean Sea, a little bit southwest of Ephesus. And the Roman authorities banished him there because he was proclaiming the gospel in these towns. And so while he was on this island, John received a series of visions which he were to write down, and this is where we get the book of Revelation. What was the date that this book was written? 95, mid-90s is what people have claimed it to be. And that's where a lot of people, evangelical scholars, think that it was written. And I am going to be one of those that say, yeah, it was probably at that time. However, there is a group of theologians out there that try to place this book in the mid-60s, first century. And so both of these views are held by evangelicals. But however, which date you think about, the mid-60s or the mid-90s, is all going to determine what your view of Revelation is, and we're going to see that in a minute. The primarily reason that they say that the mid-60s was a date, because of the persecution that is portrayed in the letters to the churches. And then also whether or not the portrayal of the beast that is mentioned in chapter 13, was it Emperor Nero's spirit that was being pushed on or still around during that time? Some have suggested, especially those that believe in the mid-60s, some have suggested that a lot of Revelation refers to the time period of Nero, and their allusions and symbolic at that time. Also, they claim that the reference of the temple in chapter 11, verses 1 and 2, they say that the temple had not yet been destroyed. Why? Because the temple in Israel was not destroyed until what time period? 70 AD. Somebody go to chapter 11. Revelation chapter 11 and read verses 1 and 2.
Then I was given a measuring reed like a rod with these words, "Go and measure God's sanctuary and the altar, count those who worship there, but exclude the courtyard outside the sanctuary. Don't measure it, because it is given to the nations, and they will trample the holy city for 42 months."
See, a lot of those that believe a earlier time period for this book think that that is talking about the temple that was there that was destroyed in 70 AD. Nero, he died in 68 AD. So they made it a case that somewhere late 60s, mid 60s, late 60s was when this book was written. Then we see the fact of what are some of the evidences of it being in the 90s. A stronger opinion is that John the Apostle was not exiled to Patmos only until about AD 95, around that time period, underneath the Emperor, I'm going to butcher this name, Domitian, whatever it is, Domitian. Whoever that emperor was, the emperor right after Nero, okay? That one. He was the one that outlawed John to the island of Patmos. So the date, whether you believe mid-90s or late 60s, is going to be determined by your viewpoint on how to look at the book of Revelation. And there are 4 viewpoints.
Well, I got a question. Already. Now, I've never heard this about different dates and stuff like this, different authors and everything. But if you look at Revelation chapter 22, verse 18 and 19, to me that right there would tell you don't be screwing around with what the way it's written. Just take it for what the way it is written.
Yeah.
Because you
But-
can get yourself in a bunch of trouble.
You can.
A bunch of trouble.
You can.
So take
The-
it at face value. Don't dispute this book. Don't try to interpret it the way somebody else wants it to read. You better read it like it is.
That's right. I mean, I agree.
So chapter 22 will tell you, you fix it and screw up.
That's right. And he's referring to you shouldn't add or take away from this book, or the curses that have been described in this book will be added to you. But this is what's called the interpretation factor. What is the...
Too many smart people trying to outthink the person that wrote the book, trying to outthink what God's trying to say.
Yeah.
There's where I have a problem. Let's look at it the way it's written here.
And part of that is
Don't look at it at all.
we got to look at it how they would have understood it in that context. And so there's these 4 different views, and I'm going to give them to you, and I'm going to tell you where I believe where I land on this view. First of all, there's a historical view. And this view is saying that the book of Revelation is like just a history book that is out there. People who use this view think Revelation is a timeline of big events in history. Each chapter or symbol stands for something that happened or will happen over hundreds or thousands of years. So, for example, one might say the beast represents bad rulers or emperors or empires, like the Roman Empire was back then, or even things that happened in the Middle Ages. They believe that John wrote the Revelation and was given a coded message about how God's plan plays out throughout history leading up to Jesus' coming back. So this is like a panoramic historical view from the time that the church started in Acts all the way to the present day. That a lot of these events have already happened at one point or another. For instance, the invasion of Rome, the rise of the Roman Catholic Church, the emergence of Islam, and the French Revolution are all interpretive methods that rob Revelation of its meaning to those whom it was written in. Why this view is tricky is because not everybody agrees on what matches with what. One person may believe that the beast in Revelation 13 might have been Nero, and another one might have said that it was Adolf Hitler. They don't line up together. And so that's why it's kind of tricky to hold on to that view. There is a view called the Petrus view. It is a picture of Revelation written to a people long time ago, telling them about stuff that is happening in the world right at that moment. The Petrus were talking about all of Revelation's events had already happened at that time when John wrote this book, mainly talking about the persecution of the Christians in Asia Minor. Okay, during all that time. And so they look back at the beast, might be Nero, or the tribulation might have been the persecution that was happening underneath Nero. These crazy images that are described in the book, like a locust with a man's face and the stinger of a scorpion, they use that as like a code word, I guess they would say, within that time period. They would say, hey, the locust is out. Instead of talking about Nero straight up, they would codename him a locust or something of that sort. This view was very popular a long time ago. I'm talking about none of us were alive back then. But it was very popular a long time ago, but luckily it had faded out. The problem with this is that if it's all about the past, what about that part of Jesus' second coming? Right? Obviously, he didn't return in the 1st century AD. So this view should have automatically been a throwaway. Then there is a futurist view. Futurists believe that most of Revelation is about things that have not happened yet. It's all about the future, especially the time period of right before when Jesus comes back. They think the book predicts things like the Battle of Armageddon, the Antichrist, and the Great Tribulation. The symbols, like the 7 seals and the 4 horsemen, are warnings about real events that will happen someday and maybe even soon. The futurist approach insists that events from chapters 6 through 22 are all in the future. All in the future, and that those chapters are literally and symbolically depict actual people and events that haven't happened yet. The only really tricky part about this view is that nobody really knows when it's going to happen. Nobody knows exactly what these symbols or things might be. For instance, the Antichrist. Does the Antichrist have to be a person? No, the Antichrist does not have to be a person. It could be a group of people, but it doesn't have to be one single person, especially because of the 10 kings and things that is on the beast's head. Yes, Daryl? Not going to go there right now. Not going to go there right now. But that's one view. And then there's an idealist view. Think of Revelation like a giant picture book full of symbols that teach big lessons about God, good, and evil. And it's not tied to specific events or times. Idealists say that Revelation isn't about specific history or future events. Instead, it's about a big picture of how God wins over evil no matter where or what. The dragons, the beast, the angels are symbols for things like sin, God's power, and the book shows how good always defeats evil at the end. This is the idealist view. It's less about when things happen and more about what it all means to love God. Why this view is tricky is because some people think that it's too vague because it doesn't pin down specific events or times. It feels like it skips the what really happens part. So out of those 4 views, there's 4 views on how we look at this book and how we read it. We have the history view, the Petrist view, the futurist view, the idealist view. Which one is the view that you think that I have? I believe that it is a futurist view. That is what I believe that this book is about. However, the first 6 chapters that talk about the churches in Asia Minor at the time was an at-then time period where John was writing a letter to those specific people at that specific time. The rest of it is what's going to happen in the future. Has some of it already happened? Has some of it not already happened? I don't know. That is way above my pay grade and way above anybody's at that moment. So how I approach this book, I approach it in a way of thinking that it is a futuristic prophecy book. Okay? When other people view the book through lenses like a history type of thing, they're going to read it as, oh yeah, this guy was Nero. This guy was Adolf Hitler. This one was this time period, all of that. Do you know every single one of us has our own view, worldview of how we look at events? We can all see the exact same event, but yet describe it in different ways because of our world view. So I believe that Revelation is literal. I also believe that some of these things that are in there are symbols to depict a literal event or person or persons at this time period. So what was the context? What was happening at the time when John was writing this book? The immediate context for both John and the initial hearers of the book of Revelation was a group of churches, 7 churches to be exact. They were experiencing severe persecution. They also had a lot of problems doctrinally in some of their things. And it was set up against a backdrop of spiritual warfare that was happening at the time. The churches underneath Nero, we know that Nero hated Christians, so much so that he would burn Christians at the stake just to light up his garden area. There was a fire in Rome at one point. Somebody had to take the blame for the fire. So who got the blame for the fire? The Christians. And it caused a major uproar. When John was arrested, he was in Ephesus, one of the churches that is mentioned in this book. He was ministering to the church there and in the surrounding cities. That's why he probably had a close relationship with these 7 churches and why he wanted to write letters to them specifically. He was teaching them to seek strength. He was wanting to strengthen those congregations because he could no longer minister to them in person. He was exiled onto that island, so he wanted them to seek the strength to continue on underneath this persecution. The churches had already begun to feel these effects of the persecution. At least one man was martyred who was probably a pastor at one of the churches. And John himself had been exiled. But a major storm of persecution was about to fall on these churches. And so John wanted to write to them to encourage them. These churches, Revelation provided a message of hope that God is in sovereign control of all the events in human history. And though evil often seems pervasive and wicked at times, their ultimate doom was certain. But Christ will come in glory and to judge and to rule. This is what we need to keep in mind when we look at this book. Okay? They were underneath a lot of persecution. So much more persecution than we could even think about. And so when these visions came to John, and God allowed these visions to happen, it was to encourage those churches to continue on, that no matter what, God was in control of everything, and that in the end, He was going to return to earth. That is the point. That gave a lot of hope to those Christians, that instead of beating their chests of why me, they knew that there was a reason behind it. And that gave them this hope. So that's why we need to look at this view and keep it in the back of our mind that this was being written to people that were being persecuted, that they may have hope, little glimpses of the future of what was going to happen so that they can continue on. We don't need to look into it and see that, hey, is Bitcoin the cashless society that it's talking about? Is Elon Musk the Antichrist? Or are the Apache helicopters the locusts that are being talking about that look like locusts with human heads, armor of, I can't remember, I think it's of a horse, and the tail of a scorpion? We need to look at it to the fact of God is in control of everything, every single event. And one day, He is going to return physically to this earth and put His foot in dirt once more. So this book offers hope for the future. It's not for us to try to put dates on things. While it's fun to try to put dates on things and try to figure this stuff out, everybody has been doing that in all of human history. Yeah, and every single one of them have missed it. You remember years ago, there was something called 88 Reasons Why Christ Would Return in 1988. You know, everybody's putting some sort of date on when Christ is going to return. While it's fun to think about, we have no idea when. We have no idea when. We can see that a lot of these things look like they're lining up, but think about when World War II was happening. Wouldn't a lot of people be looking at Revelation during World War II and be like, hey, this is it? This is the end? And so, what this really does is encourages us to look towards the future, that God is in control of it all. And yes, when we look through the book, and we're going to go through verse by verse through every single one of them, I'm going to give some ideas of what I may think some of these things might be. But I want you to know that my view is not the gospel truth. It is just an opinion. Everybody has opinions. They're all like armpits. They all stink. You know? So it's just my opinion on what some of this stuff may be. Because I truly believe we are right there at the end. That this is no longer a future, but we are living the present in it. Now, who were the 7 churches that this book was written to? I'm going to briefly go over each church, but we're going to have a deeper dive with them when we come encounter with each one of them. The first one, I'm going to go in order, is Ephesus. That's in Revelation chapter 2. Ephesus was one of the most important cities in the Roman province of Asia. It was famous for its temple to Artemis, and it's actually one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. A lot of that temple is still in place. In Ephesus, this was the first church to be addressed in Revelation. It was praised for its hard work and discernment, but it was criticized for losing their first love. It was located at a major harbor on the Aegean Sea, and it was grand enough in its glory days. The city of Ephesus remains an archaeological treasure. In addition to the Temple of Artemis, its impressive ruins include the Library of Celsus and the imposing Ephesian Theater mentioned in Acts 19. The church in Ephesus was founded by Paul in the book of Acts. And it was the most prominent church in Asia Minor. The next church that is being addressed is Smyrna. As one of the principal cities of the Roman Asia, Smyrna was in competition with Ephesus and Pergamum for the title of the first city in Asia. Smyrna was a very wealthy city. It was famous for its production of myrrh. And actually, did you know that Smyrna literally means myrrh? It's production of myrrh. Where else do we see myrrh in Scripture? The wise man, and also probably one of the spices that was being placed upon Christ at his death. Its loyalty to the Roman Empire was very, very strong. It was the home of the author and poet Homer, who wrote the book, the Odyssey and the Iliad. And it was home to the temple of Athena, who was an ancient Greek goddess of wisdom, strategic warfare, and handcrafts. Smyrna is remembered today, remembered for its history of martyrdom, including the faithful Bishop Polycarp. That is where he was martyred. The church here was commended for its enduring faith during persecution, and they were encouraged to remain faithful even to death. Smyrna is still there today. The church is not, however, but Smyrna is still there today, and it's called Izmir. The remnants of ancient Smyrna are still visible, including the Temple of Athena, an ancient Christian basilica, and some other places. The third church that we're going to look at is Pergamum. Pergamum was the center for learning and culture in Asia Minor. It was the second greatest place of learning, apart from Greece and Athens, but it was known for its culture and its education. It boasted a very magnificent library. In fact, it was one that was, have everybody heard the Library of Alexandria? It was second largest library to Alexandria. They wanted to be the biggest, and so they were in competition with Alexandria to become the greatest library. That is important later on when we come to this book, when we look at the church in Pergamum. It was known for the center of pagan worship, with temples dedicated to gods such as Zeus, Athena, Dionysus, and many, many more. It was basically like a mini Rome that was out there. And because it was the center for pagan worship, Jesus addresses to the church of Pergamum. He says, I know where you dwell, where Satan's throne is. John praises the church for holding fast to the name of Christ despite living in a city that was surrounded by pagans. Pergamum was also Rome's second capital. It was kind of like how we would have county seats or something of that sort. It was very closely associated with Rome. Pergamum is still there, and you can see remains of that city to its day. The fourth, I think we're on the fourth one. The fourth church is Thyatira, or Thyatira. How would you say it, John?
Thyatira.
Yeah, Thyatira. That's right. I'm redneck. Thyatira. It was founded under Alexandria the Great. It was a thriving commercial city. It was known for its trade and the production of a purple dye. Remember, there was somebody that was one of Paul's converts who dealt with purple dye. And she was known as an encourager, and she was from this area. Does anybody remember her name? Lydia. Lydia was from this area. In Jesus' message, he recognized the church there for their love, faith, and their service, but he reprimands them for tolerating the teachings of false prophetesses who led believers into immorality. And so this compromising of their faith was likely due to the necessity of membership and participation in one of the many trade guilds that was there. Sardis. Sardis was a wealthy city. It was famous for its military strategic location. Its nearby gold deposits and signature method of refining gold and silver that allowed Sardis to mint the highest grade coins that were available in the ancient world. By the time of the early church, much of Sardis's glory was laid in the past. The church was commended for being spiritually dead, with a reputation for life, but no actual vitality. Sardis was the ancient capital of the Lydian kingdom, and it was strategically set up on a plateau. And there had been many, many battles to try to take over the city, as you can understand, with all of their gold and silver minerals. Today, Sardis' remains are basically the only ancient temple to Artemis and Zeus, a gymnasium complex, and a 3rd century synagogue. The sixth church that we come to is the church in Philadelphia. This city, Philadelphia, is considered the gateway to the east. It is not the city of brotherly love. It is the gateway to the east, the city of Philadelphia. And it exported grapes, textiles, leather goods. And so that's what's made that town very, very wealthy. And when Revelation was written, the Philadelphian Christians were evidently, they were suffering persecution at the times from the local Jews, whom Jesus calls the synagogue of Satan in Revelation 3:9. He commands the church for its faithfulness despite their very little strength. In fact, Jesus promised to make the faithful into a temple pillar. Philadelphia had a very big history of earthquakes. meaning that they needed to have strong buildings to keep up the structures or that they would fall. And they were crucial to their residents' survival. Jesus used the Philadelphians' value for physical stability to underwrite the importance of spiritual endurance. Okay, why am I telling you all of this? Because it kind of helps us understand what is going to be talked about and how to read these letters. Because one church, the last church that we're going to talk about, a lot of people understand what this church is known for, Laodicea. Does anybody know what Laodicea is known for? I'm giving you a big hint right now. Lukewarm water. Lukewarm water. Laodicea was 10 miles from, let me go to it. Laodicea was 10 miles from Colossae, which was to the east, and it had a good supply of cold water. It was coming from the mountains. And then 6 miles to the north was a town by the name of Hierapolis, that's it. It was 6 miles to the north, and it was famous for its hot springs. So to get their water, they had to build aqueducts from both of these towns. And as you can imagine, when hot water and cold water mix, what does it make? Lukewarm water. This was a real life situation that they had to deal with. So Jesus used this metaphor to them and called them, the church, as being lukewarm, that they were neither hot nor cold. So like their water, Jesus said that their church was neither rejuvenating nor was it healthy. And it risked of being expelled as one would spit out bad water from their mouth. Okay, have you ever got into your vehicle after leaving a water bottle in there and you just put it and you just cannot take it, you just spit it out? That's how the water was there, and that's when the people would read this book and they would understand exactly what Jesus was talking about. However, not all things were bad in Laodicea. They gained their wealth through trade and banking. So if you want to be mad at the banks, this was one of the first banks in the ancient world. Be mad at the church at Laodicea, okay? It was known for its medical school and its costly fabrics. The Laodicea's, their famous aqueduct system still stands today, along with its ruins of theaters, their temples, their baths. And though not many are intact, but they are well preserved. So these are the 7 churches that John writes to Asia Minor, giving this book of Revelation. When we look into, starting next week and through on, we are going to take a deeper dive into these cities. We're going to look at why Jesus was telling them some of this sort of thing. But as we look at Revelation, we're going to look at it through the eyes of the churches that were there at the moment. And yes, we will have some fun. We will have some fun with it because there are some things that I believe are lining up directly with this book in the futuristic prophecy sort of situation. Some of it you may not like. Some of it you may. But I have a view of what I think may be the Antichrist, what I may think is the beast that worships the Antichrist. I have a view of what these battles are going to be like. But, like I said before, it's an opinion. It's not gospel truth. And there is something about this book that a lot of people love, and it's the looking into the future of the unknown. And I could even imagine there's some reason through all of history we love looking towards the future and the unknown. All the way back to, Adam and Eve, you would say. And so while we look at this, we're going to look at it through the eyes of literally. We're going to read it word for word. And we're going to look at it in the fact of, okay, what was Jesus talking to the church in Ephesus, Smyrna, etc.? Because if they were undergoing severe persecution, Jesus gave John this vision of a slight glimpse, like a movie trailer of some sort, of what is going to happen, so that they would have encouragement to continue to spread the gospel. That is the main thing. Because all throughout this book, you are going to see that Jesus is the main central focus. So, anybody have any wild theories or questions or comments or
Can you start over?
whatever?
I missed a lot.
I'm recording it. You can go back and listen, sir. Okay. So next week we're going to look at the prologue. We're going to take these portions for the first half of this series. We're going to look at the churches individually, so each night would have its own specific church. Maybe I may combine two of them in one. But once we get to chapter 6 on through the rest, we're going to look at them at pretty much big chunks at a time because they are kind of all interconnected. When we get to the seals, we'll take one seal at a time, one horseman and all that at a time as well. But, all right. Next week we are starting the prologue.
Okay, so it's the week after.
It's the week after, August 20th, where we're going to do the prayer walk. So we're going to take lessons from the prologue next week. That's your homework. Read chapter 1. I read chapter 1. Anything else? All right. Looking forward to it. We'll pray and we will dismiss. Father God, thank you for tonight again. Lord, I ask that when we look through your word, that we will look at it literally, that we will learn from what you have wrote to encourage these churches, that no matter what may happen in the future, Lord, that we know that you are in control of it all. We know that's how the story is going to end, that you will come back and you will reign once more, literally right here on earth with your people. We thank you for all that you've done in our lives. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Have a good rest of your week.
We thank you for listening to today's message at Bar None Cowboy Ministries in Omaha, Texas. We invite you to connect with us on Facebook or YouTube. We hope that you were encouraged.